Hello everyone, welcome to the Postcard Buddhism. Today we will explore a profound and transformative topic. The Buddha teaches the way to escape suffering. Join us as we delve into the wisdom and practical guidance that can help us transcend pain and discover lasting peace and happiness. Renounce and craving. Nowadays, banners are widely used to advise young people in society as a whole to avoid the path leading to HIV and AIDS with striking slogans such as "Don't die from ignorance." Banners reflect a decisive attitude to end or discourage indulgence in drugs, illustrated with a skull crossed out and the caption, "Don't try even once." One attempt is enough to bring death. One attempt is enough to bring suffering, regret, and an inability to renew life. These decisive attitudes help people boldly end harmful behaviors when they see them as unnecessary for a happy life. Similarly, in the scriptures, the Buddha provided many images and slogans to guide his followers on the path of ethics to attain joy according to the Dharma. The image that the Tathagata advises is to install the element and attitude of renunciation in the nature of the stream of enjoying sensory pleasures. The renunciation of craving program is designed to seek out sexual activity needs, control, and transform these needs to help practitioners achieve long-term cultivation. For lay people, sexual activity needs are confined within the scope of the law and marital life. Renunciation can be understood as letting go of a debt, discarding a burden from one's shoulders, or escaping from pulling a cart. This state of lightness and comfort is free from any emotional entanglements. Renunciation creates a value of ease and freedom from entanglements. For lay people, having extramarital affairs creates entanglements, secrecy, fatigue, and tension. For monks and nuns, indulging in sensory pleasures results in the loss of everything they have committed to their spiritual life over many years for a certain ideal. Seeing these as burdens or chains that can destroy a happy life, renunciation and transformation can occur smoothly without using any coercive force for control. The need for sensory pleasure can arise from consciousness, through a self-controlled, self-installed program with heightened awareness, or with support from very artistic visualization methods. What happens when desire ends? This is a major question posed by many lay people or those who do not accept the path of celibacy practiced by Buddhist monks, who transform sexual energy while other religions still allow their clergy to have family lives. Buddhism is the only religion that advises its monastics to not concern themselves with or pay attention to household life in such a manner. Thus, the question arises, after desire ends, does a person still have the value of life, since it is a very natural instinct? Another question follows, if all men and women follow Buddhism, will humanity face extinction? Even if everyone were to follow Buddhism, this scenario would not lead to human extinction. In the endless cycle of rebirth, those who transform their sexual energy become sates. They do not continue the process of lineage or reproduction. However, sentient beings, animals in the Saha world, and beings from other planets, after repaying their karma, will be reborn as humans. The process of transformation from humans to heavenly beings, sates, and from animals to humans happens daily, hourly, every second, every minute, everywhere. Some beings from other planets are reborn as humans on this planet, and vice versa. Therefore, even if this entire planet practiced Buddhism in an artistic and correct manner according to the Buddhist teachings, there would never be a state of human extinction. Moreover, the number of people who become monks and nuns is very small. The highest is in Tibet, where the proportion of monastics is around 40%. In Thailand, it is about 5 to 6%, even though every man must go through a monastic life upon reaching adulthood. Therefore, it is unnecessary to ask questions that will never happen in reality. Another viewpoint is, I need to continue my family line. Going into monastic life will deprive my intellectual potential in fields like economics, art, and other areas from serving society. Besides, there are many sperm banks worldwide, particularly those of scientists, scholars, and outstanding talents. People hope that these exceptional genes, when implanted into women's bodies, will create intellectuals for society. In reality, the structure and influence of genetic inheritance only function to a limited extent. Karma determines genetic inheritance. Karma creates changes beyond the structure and nature of genes. This is undeniable. Many teachers are educators, yet give birth to children who burn books. Many virtuous parents give birth to incorrigible children. Human character is related to karma. Karma directly or indirectly connects to customs, educational traditions, environment, circumstances, and interactional behavior. Genes alone are insufficient. Thus, there is no need to fear extinction. When desire ends, something else remains, which is transformed energy. This energy is clearly stated in the scriptures. Achieving the ultimate peaceful life, free from all suffering, the practitioner's mind will be absolutely at peace. The practitioner will attain the qualities of a saint, becoming the highest among humans and heavenly beings. Ending desire does not mean losing it. It does not mean extinction, but becoming a person with greater, more substantial, and more lasting contributions. Buddhist talents often come from disciples who seek refuge, not from those born into that particular sect or lineage. A lineage or sect can have hundreds of thousands of disciples, but the successor often comes from elsewhere. In Buddhism, many disciples have relied on their teacher's reputation, influence, and position in society, religion, or the community. This reliance often hinders their long-term advancement. Therefore, high-ranking monks are ready to teach disciples from other lineages who can still bring equivalent or greater value than their own disciples. Lay people are similar. People typically want to pass on the secrets of their trade to their biological children rather than to strangers. Today, this trend has changed in the West. Some millionaires and billionaires, seeing that their children lack filial piety, believe that transferring the family fortune could lead to their corruption. Hence, many parents hide their financial accounts. They make wills while still healthy so that, if something unexpected happens, their account balances automatically transfer to charity programs or educational and social welfare funds. They clearly see that the value of happiness does not lie in continuing the family line, but in serving whom, how, and to what extent. At some point, people adopt such a perspective, and compassion begins to expand. No longer does one serve solely one's family members, but also those who are not related. This reduces competition, exploitation, and rivalry to a minimum. If one only cares for their relatives, selfishness and self-interest are present. When the scope of care expands, that selfishness and self-interest transforming sexual desire. The sutra describes the art of helping the co-practitioner, the celestial ruler Sakka, transform his sexual energy. Sakka made a request to the Blessed One, "Please give me a brief teaching on how to transform sexual energy for a practitioner." By this, he meant, "I don't have much time to listen, and I lack the patience to learn." Moreover, he did not approach the Blessed One with the eager attitude of a monastic, as his inherent role was to enjoy sexual activities. Although the sutra does not clearly state his intentions, it can be inferred from his questioning manner and the way he received the teachings that Sakka might have wanted to be a co-practitioner of the Venerable Moggallana, or he wanted his sexual indulgence not to cause him to fall from the 33 heavens to lower realms. After the Blessed One delivered the brief teaching, Sakka bowed and immediately disappeared. This was a way of avoiding, as Sakka feared that if the teaching was too long, he might be convinced to replace his worldly needs with monastic life. He knew well that many who approached the Blessed One, intending to challenge him, ended up becoming his disciples after just one discourse or dialogue. The miraculous ability to transform through education made Sakka aware that he did not want to linger any longer in conversation with the Blessed One. After hearing the teaching, he disappeared immediately. From a distance, seeing this, Venerable Moggallana used his supernatural powers to quickly fly from the lecture hall to the 33 heavens. He saw Sakka enjoying sensual pleasures with many celestial maidens and attendants in the pure lotus garden. Nearby, 500 celestial musical instruments played 500 types of melodious, enchanting music to create emotional arousal, prolonging the various forms of enjoyment. Seeing the Venerable Moggallana appear, Sakka stopped all festivities and greeted him with very polite and respectful words. He invited the Venerable to sit on his throne, while he himself sat on a lower seat to show respect, despite their previous lives as co-practitioners. It is noteworthy that regardless of the royal title or high social status one holds, the spiritual life of lay people generally remains lower than that of genuine monastics. Respecting true spiritual values enhances the happiness of life. Any government that attempts to suppress the role of spirituality will not last long, as they lose the opportunity to learn about spiritual and ethical living from monastics. The kings of Thailand and other Theravada Buddhist countries bow and pay homage to monastics, even if they have just been ordained that morning. This beautiful tradition continues to this day. The king of Thailand himself has been ordained. Every few years, he enters monastic life for 3 months during the retreat season. Currently, the king of Thailand is very exemplary, with only one wife, unlike King Maidol, who reigned around the mid-20th century and introduced modern Thai cultural contact with the West. He had many wives and nearly 100 children. His life was portrayed in 2 Hollywood films, both of which won Oscars, The King and I and Anna and the King. Returning to the sutra after being warmly welcomed, Venerable Moggallana pretended to probe Sakka's mind about the teaching given by the Blessed One. He said, "It would be a great blessing if I could hear a part of the marvelous teaching that the Blessed One briefly gave you earlier." This was an artful way of gauging Sakka's thoughts before attempting to transform him or utilizing others' power and mind reading to understand the emotional state of the person needing transformation. Faced with the Venerable's question, Sakka found it hard to refuse. However, Sakka, being deep and very psychological, replied, "Venerable, I am very busy with many different tasks, both for myself and for the residents of the 33 heavens." This was an excuse so that if he forgot, it would be an understandable oversight. In the second part, Sakka praised, "I listened very attentively to the Blessed One's teaching, and I have grasped and contemplated it thoroughly. I can never forget it." His humble words implicitly sought praise, suggesting that despite being very busy with countless tasks, he still remembered the Blessed One's teachings and could recount them to the Venerable Moggallana, which was indeed a rare achievement. Using excuses to forget is a common way to free oneself from the need to practice. When people have an attitude of making excuses, everything becomes blocked. Fortunately, in the second part, Sakka showed his attentiveness, though it was limited, listening to seek knowledge rather than to practice. Then Sakka expressed pride and admiration for his achievements. Of course, he knew well that he and Venerable Moggallana were co-practitioners. The Venerable had become an arahant, powerfully supporting the Blessed One's teaching efforts. Meanwhile, Sakka had become the celestial ruler of the 33 heavens, once leading his disciples to hear the Blessed One's teachings. But his excessive pride made him blind to the spiritual value of Venerable Moggallana, even though he invited the Venerable to sit on his throne. He boasted, "The supreme palace, Vesavana, that I created is the result of a victorious battle between the celestial beings and the Asura realm. These are 2 realms existing on different planets. The sutra describes that in the Asura world, men are very ugly while women are very beautiful. Celestial beings often desire Asura women, hence battles for Asura women have occurred. The celestial beings often win because their scientific knowledge and strategic resources are superior. Anger makes the Asura beings smaller, uglier, and devoid of intelligence and wisdom." Next, he described, "The palace has 100 different spires, each with 7 triangular mansions, each mansion with 7 celestial maidens, and each maiden has 7 attendants. If one does the math, the palace has 4,900 celestial maidens as his wives and 34,300 attendants serving them." Sakka invited the Venerable to tour the magnificent palace, radiant with the colors of 7 different precious gems. Venerable Moggallana silently accepted the invitation, intending to accompany him to create an opportunity to transform his arrogance. Excessive pride made Sakka lose the potential and seeds of a renounced life he had planted in previous lives with Venerable Moggallana. Celestial ruler Sakka and King Vesavana allowed Venerable Moggallana to go ahead. The sutra describes, as they passed through each triangular mansion and spire, many celestial maidens and attendants bowed their heads shyly, like brides meeting their fathers-in-law. This shyness creates an enchanting beauty that attracts love and sexual desire. Living in such an environment, it is difficult for people to escape enjoyment. However, Venerable Moggallana, having attained arahantship, was not conquered by the subtle expressions of love through the feminine form as Sokka had been. Victory often makes people arrogant. Through conquest and invasion, kings with strategic prowess expand their territories and often become highly arrogant, believing themselves to be unparalleled geniuses. Sokka also fell into this state of arrogance. Admiring the magnificence of the palace, he told his co-practitioner, "On Earth, when people see the magnificent planet we created, they know it is the 33 heavens established by celestial ruler Sokka. Previous celestial rulers could not achieve this." Arrogance led to a sense of entitlement, seeing himself as the most contributive. If Sokka's past life had not been a practitioner, his need for enjoying sensual activities would have been much greater. Knowing creates stopping, and understanding creates ending. Not knowing, not understanding, can entangle one in enjoyment. Here, Sokka still knew to request the Buddha to teach about transforming sexual energy for practitioners, as he had failed in previous lives, and in the current life, he also completely failed. Too much pleasure makes it difficult to practice. In the past, monks practiced in mountains and forests, with limited interaction with the environment and material conditions, so their senses were well controlled, cared for, and transformed. Today, in a diverse, multicultural environment, the factors of interaction create variations, making it difficult to practice and transform emotional needs. Seeing Sokka's excessive arrogance, Venerable Moggallana used his supernatural powers to concentrate force on the tip of his toe, pressing it into the ground. The entire Vesavana palace shook. While celestial ruler Sokka and King Vesavana were startled, their hair standing on end, the subjects cheered in amazement at the Venerable's rare and miraculous power. Their admiration increased Sokka's anxiety, fearing replacement. This forced him to face an internal crisis. He began to contemplate that all sensual happiness could confront impermanence. This notion arose, making him fearful. This was one of the techniques Venerable Moggallana deliberately instilled to awaken the consciousness of impermanence and non-self in Sokka's mind, aiming to revive the spiritual seeds the celestial ruler had planted in past lives as a practitioner. Such awakening techniques are very necessary and meaningful. Then, Venerable Moggallana disappeared without a word, leaving behind endless astonishment from admirers and fear from Sokka. Before he could calm down, the celestial maidens asked Sokka, "Is that the Blessed One, the teacher of the celestial ruler whom you told us about?" Sokka shook his head. "That is only my co-practitioner." But the celestial maidens did not believe. It is wonderful that the celestial ruler has a friend with such great supernatural power and miraculous authority. Surely that must be the Blessed One, the celestial ruler's teacher. The doubt further revealed Sokka's limitations compared to his co-practitioner. Borrowing the far to speak of the near, Moggallana returned to the lecture hall at the deer park, the earthly world, and prostrated before the Buddha in the presence of many monastics and laypeople. He recounted the entire event and requested the Buddha to expound that sutra again. The method of borrowing stories from the heavens to speak of earthly matters is a wonderful art of teaching in the traditional sutras of the Tathagata. Here, the concept of speaking of heavenly matters is not about fantastical elements but rather very realistic ones. Borrowing stories from the heavens to discuss earthly matters is a technique of creating comparisons. Comparisons can lead to arrogance, but can also inspire progress, urging one to strive for what has not yet been achieved. Opening the door to comparisons ensures one never remains proudly self-satisfied as number one. Venerable Moggallana borrowed stories from the heavens to discuss matters on earth. Of course, he did not speak, he merely recounted. Everyone present listened. The psychological effect encouraged all genuine monastics to see that transforming sensory pleasures can bring happiness to humans. Otherwise, people may fall into unstable and temporary happiness. Precarious happiness often occurs in relationships and marriages when boredom starts to appear after a period of interaction and cohabitation. The tendency to seek someone more attractive in appearance, talent, economics, or other needs can dissipate the sense of happiness. This happiness is very temporary. When witnessing Moggallana's display of miraculous powers, the celestial maidens exclaimed in admiration, signifying that the husband's image became dim and ordinary. This need for replacement and comparison creates more competition. This is the method of borrowing stories from the heavens to discuss earthly matters. In love and marriage, comparing in such a way leads to regret and living in illusions, not acknowledging the present reality. The Blessed One often did not teach without a request. The request creates a psychological effect of anticipation and longing, and the value of this longing makes it easier for the listener to absorb the teachings, leading to successful practice. The Blessed One recounted the sutra, and everyone present, especially Venerable Moggallana, was immensely joyful, believed, and practiced accordingly. Meanwhile, the beginning of the sutra describes that Sakka only joyfully prostrated before the Blessed One and then disappeared, without genuine faith. Joy does not mean faith. He was joyful after hearing the teaching, thanked, and left. Believing and considering it as philosophy to practice is another matter. Here, the psychological effect of the Buddha's sutra on Sakka, a celestial ruler with many means of enjoyment, was entirely different from that on Venerable Moggallana and the Buddha's monastic disciples. The greatest psychological effect the Buddha needed was not just joy, but faith, acceptance, reverence, and practice. Faith means believing with true faith in the truth, with intellect, understanding, judgment, and knowledge. Acceptance means practicing, receiving, and integrating it into the mind as a guideline. Reverence means upholding it with all respect. Practice means propagating it, maintaining it oneself, and spreading it to others to expand its reach. The sutra addresses two aspects of life. The first tendency is to immerse in pleasures, where listeners hear the teachings casually without serious practice, not aiming for liberation because their roles and positions do not drive them to greater needs. Limited karmic consciousness creates limited lifetimes. Limited understanding creates limited happiness and suffering. Celestial ruler Sakka is an exemplary figure. He thinks of himself as a victor. All his achievements make him boastful, acting familiar with the nobility. Recall the question the celestial maidens posed to him. "Is this the Blessed One you have told us about?" He had talked a lot about the Blessed One to his wives, but never created opportunities for them to meet him. This indicates that he wanted to show that only he had the qualification to interact with the esteemed, especially the top figure in spirituality and ethics, while his maidens in attendance never had such opportunities. This was a way to boost his ego. When introducing Venerable Moggallana, once again, Sakka wanted to boast about having extraordinary friends. His art of boastfulness made him act familiar, creating an important position for himself that others did not have. Today, when interacting with spiritual and ethical leaders, people of significant social roles should avoid the element of acting familiar. Think of it as an equal opportunity to contribute to each other's needs. Monastics do not seek favor from authorities or people with social roles, but treat them as ordinary people. Sometimes, people of significant social roles visit temples and are not warmly received by the abbots, making them reluctant to return. They want their ego boosted, while monks aim to transform their ego. The purpose of these different attitudes leads to different outcomes. The second tendency, the Blessed One wanted listeners to hear not just to understand and boast about the knowledge they gained, but to practice and propagate. The path to enlightenment is established on knowledge, based on thinking, and demonstrated through specific actions. Although the sutra is primarily for monastics, lay people can still learn, especially those heavily addicted to sensual pleasures, where addiction can lead to family ruin and suffering for spouses and children. Applying even 30% of the Blessed One's teachings can significantly reduce these enjoyment needs. The success of a practitioner is transforming this energy. After transforming sexual energy, one becomes selfless and altruistic, with boundless compassion, unrestricted by any form. Learning this sutra enhances the seeds of practice, seeds to cultivate happiness in marriage, love, and all areas related directly or indirectly to the senses. Recognizing the links, the Great Discourse on the Destruction of Craving, number 38 in the middle-length discourses, addresses the art of severing the links of suffering. The use of the image links of suffering to translate the Pali term tanasankhaya, which means destruction of craving, arises because the act of destruction evokes the image of cutting from the root. Craving, refers to the attitude of attachment to the essence of suffering and all images directly or indirectly related to it. Instead of saying, cutting the links of craving, one could say, cutting the links of suffering, as the nature of craving leads to suffering. The discourse originates from an incident involving a monastic named Sati, who mistakenly believed that the consciousness transmigrates through the realms of existence without undergoing any change. In response, the Buddha analyzed the doctrine of dependent origination, explaining the nature of conditions that directly or indirectly affect the functioning of body and mind. Through this, he guided the method of severing the process and links of suffering. In the discourse, The Snake Catcher, number 22, the Blessed One explained the attitude that enjoying sexual activities does not hinder the spiritual path and life of a liberated person, but highlighted the nature of sensual craving and attachment to sexuality. In this discourse, the Blessed One teaches and analyzes the nature of wrong views, the attitude of attachment to erroneous practice and concepts, which are equally significant in leading to suffering in the cycle of birth and death. In Buddhism, attachment is regarded as a link of bondage. Clinging to any viewpoint initiates bondage. If one says, living without a standpoint makes life meaningless, then standpoint here can be understood as an attitude of attachment to what is right, to ethics, to spiritual values, etc. Even though these are right, good, and valuable, attachment to them also leads to links of consequence. Buddhism never uses the concept of a standpoint, but only the true path or spiritual principles that have the value of transformation and bring happiness. In other words, the true path and spiritual principles are not for attachment, but are used as tools. The nature of a tool is conditional. It may be very suitable in one situation, but may become meaningless in another. It can be an ideal choice for one person, but can be utterly meaningless for others. It corresponds to the character and level of karmic consciousness of individuals. The issue is that Buddhism never teaches practitioners to cling to anything, even if it is the path or the principles, but to use the path and principles as effective means that can bring about happiness. Spiritual trends. The traditional Brahminical trend, starting from the Vedic scriptures, this trend equates what is stated in these texts as the ultimate truth, with the author being none other than the Supreme God or Brahma. Consequently, a stratified social structure composed of various castes emerged under the imposition of this perspective, discouraging people from questioning or altering it. This trend brought suffering to many people, alongside the happiness of the upper echelons of society, which included the elite intellectuals of the traditional Brahminical school and the royal tradition. The remaining 80% of India's social structure became victims of this erroneous view. This view, a form of attachment to wrong tradition, led to the miseries of the populace in a nation. The Brahminical tradition was considered a formidable fortress, challenged over a significant period by a new spiritual tradition, the Shramana tradition. The term Shramana was initially used to denote all those who renounced, rejecting the philosophical traditions of the Vedic scriptures, challenging the truths stated in these texts, and not acknowledging the role of Brahma as the creator, the social inequality of the four castes, gender inequality, and many other social ills. These renunciants sought a spiritual path different from the tradition imposed on them. Four notable Shramana traditions emerged. 1. Natural Shramana tradition. These ascetics wandered from place to place, living a life of austerity, hoping that their senses would lose the capacity for enjoyment, paving the way for spiritual emergence. 2. Austerity Shramana tradition. This included practices like standing without sitting or lying down, or lying on thorns or rough rocks to create physical discomfort, aiming to eliminate all passions and desires. This tradition also fell under the natural Shramana tradition. 3. Jain Shramana tradition. These ascetics practiced severe austerities, abstaining from meat and not killing any living beings, but they often fell into extreme practices. They aimed to return to a primal state by living naked, without any material possessions. These three spiritual traditions opened new paths that challenged the Brahminical tradition. However, in the process of replacement and challenge, their content was not entirely accepted due to various limitations. For instance, while the Brahminical tradition advocated a caste-based society, the Shramana tradition rejected this system but failed to provide a convincing ethical, spiritual, social, and logical foundation. Moreover, some natural Shramana practitioners expressed a primitive materialistic attitude, denying any afterlife. This notion could be dangerous to ethical life because if the moral cause and effect relationship between the present and future life is not established, people may lose responsibility for their actions, leading to ethical degradation and communal suffering. The Shramana tradition of the Tathagata. The Tathagata's, Buddha's, tradition emerged with many values, strongly attracting spiritual life. He was also a Shramana but excelled in practice methods and the realistic values of these methods, achieving long-lasting and thorough transformation that could uproot suffering. This tradition became the new spiritual soil and nourishment of India. However, due to the rapid influx of many monks into the Buddha's Sangha, many did not abandon the erroneous views they held as practitioners of the Shramana and Brahminical traditions. These erroneous views continued to influence and shape the correct viewpoints of properly practicing monks who lacked the faith and solid knowledge to recognize the harmful non-traditional Buddhist views affecting their spiritual practice. One such individual was the monk Sati. The method of practice often originates from the mind's perception. When the mind's perception is flawed, everything that follows, whether directly or indirectly, can be influenced. Recognizing mistakes, the sutra serves both educational purposes and propagates teachings that parents can apply to help their children and loved ones when they identify incomplete aspects in their understanding, character, tendencies, and life. For the Buddha, there was no imposition or elevation of truth into something that others must follow through compulsion in correcting and transforming wrong views. Bhikkhu Sati, who came from a low-caste fishing family, held the view that consciousness is a process that roams through the 6 realms and 3 paths without any change in essence, cognition, or psychology leading to daily behavior. This view is considered central and core to Brahminical philosophy. They believe that the human mind does not change. Anyone born a Brahmin will be reborn as a Brahmin for thousands of lifetimes. Anyone born into a royal family or as a ruler of a nation will have descendants who inherit that spiritual tradition. Conversely, those from lower caste carry the nature, mindset, tendencies, seeds, and capabilities of inferiority, binding their fate to their mother's womb. This belief leads to a deterministic view of social structure and daily life, which still perpetuates suffering in Indian society today. When fellow monks learned of Bhikkhu Sati's erroneous view, they used various methods, including questioning and refutation, to prove that this view was unorthodox in Buddhism. As a Buddhist monk, one should never propagate the values of non-Buddhist teachings as truth. Everyone has the right to free will, free opinion, and free doctrine. The Buddha acknowledged this, but when someone claims to speak the Buddha's teachings, the content must align with what the Tathagata taught. One cannot mix and equate 2 different viewpoints, doctrines from Brahmanism or pre-Buddhist religions, and claim them as part of the Tathagata's teachings. This causes confusion between 2 entirely different contents. Fellow practitioners advise Bhikkhu Sati not to cling to, accept, or maintain his erroneous view. The Buddha had declared, all phenomena in this life are formed by conditions. Human consciousness is the same. It is a set of conditions. Without conditions or lacking conditions, consciousness cannot exist and manifest. Despite this, Bhikkhu Sati stubbornly maintained his view. The community, realizing they could not persuade their fellow monk, respectfully reported the matter to the Buddha. The Buddha summoned Bhikkhu Sati to clarify if he indeed held that view, or if the monks had falsely accused him due to disagreements or personal dislikes. Naturally, with his divine insight and wisdom, the Buddha knew very well who held what views, their mental states and tendencies. He saw the mental formations in their paths clearly. However, in societal terms, he still used the law to clarify the situation transparently. The Tathagata knew Bhikkhu Sati had a mistaken view, but to use this as an educational opportunity to help others with similar misunderstandings avoid greater and more serious mistakes, the Buddha gathered the monks and lay disciples to listen to his explanation to Bhikkhu Sati. When questioned, Bhikkhu Sati confirmed that all the reports were true. The Buddha asserted, due to misunderstanding and not fully grasping what the Tathagata taught about samsara, karma, the process of cause and effect, and human ethical responsibilities for actions, Sati holds a wrong view. If this wrong view is not transformed, not only will Sati destroy his own happiness, but worse, he will bring misfortune and suffering to others. This is one of the ways to self-harm one's virtue. Bhikkhu Sati proclaimed a doctrine and claimed that the Tathagata endorsed it, thus attributing to the Buddha a view he never held, taught, or propagated, leading people to misunderstand his teachings. This obstructs spiritual progress through his teachings. When equating two different views from two different religious traditions, people steeped in the Brahminical spiritual tradition cannot see the unique aspects of the Buddha's teachings and follow this new path. Therefore, when proclaiming and spreading a mistaken view attributed to the Tathagata, its influence and harm are immense. The Buddha stated, if there is intentional and deliberate distortion of the Tathagata's views, it is self-destructive. Self-destructive means losing the path to enlightenment, preventing others from seeing the profound and wonderful Dharma. The Buddha clearly stated, there cannot be a spark from the mistaken view that the essence of consciousness is fixed and unchanging in the process of birth and death. In today's era, this view may seem obvious since people have experienced extensive education, learning from predecessors, religions, philosophy, ethics, etc. However, in the Buddha's time, this was a very unfamiliar concept. In the process of birth and death, consciousness changes when humans are reborn as humans, celestial beings, animals, or hungry ghosts, enduring various sufferings and pains related to emotions, cognition, etc. These are influenced by speech, thoughts, and actions during life in human form or other forms of existence. Thoughts, feelings, tendencies, emotions, attitudes, ideals, and ideologies change continuously. Even the most steadfast or conservative people experience change sooner or later to some extent. In the process of birth and death, how can one maintain a fixed nature? The Tathagata emphasized, if we see that human consciousness constantly changes, then there cannot be a fixed fate of emotions or cognition. Therefore, there cannot be a predetermined fate of society or humans. The Buddha aimed to show everyone, especially those heavily influenced by Brahminical spiritual traditions, this truth so that social injustices could be transformed and changed. The role of consciousness. The Buddha asked Sati to present his view so that he could analyze and explain the nature of consciousness. Bhikkhu Sati stated, it is consciousness that is the agent of speaking, feeling, and receiving here and there, and it is also consciousness that causes humans to endure all suffering and actions in general. This view makes it challenging to differentiate between Buddhist and Brahminical teachings. Generally, when discussing responsibility for ethical behavior, people often envision an agent that causes suffering or happiness. Humans are seen as the architects of their own suffering or happiness, and also the recipients of their actions. In terms of communication, declaring such responsibility is necessary to establish the value and impact of behavior on human life. From a deeper philosophical perspective, the concept of an agent is merely a borrowed notion without inherent value. The Buddha's doctrine of non-self does not deny human elements but asserts that humans are a combination of mind and matter. When humans are viewed as a combination of mind and matter, a stream of consciousness, the operation of karma, and conceptualization related directly or indirectly to it can change. Thus, the nature of life is not fixed but a flow of emotions, cognition, and actions. The creation of actions is a flow, and the reception of actions affecting human life is also a flow. This process of change is continuous. This view allows people to renew their lives after having done wrong, planted seeds of unhappiness, and caused suffering to others in the past. If one believes that this agent is fixed and that actions affecting it never change, it creates destiny and determines karma for individuals, society, and the community. According to Brahminical views, Bhikkhu Sati believed that consciousness roams without change. The Buddha highlighted the differences between his teachings on cause and effect and those of Brahmanism. Sati represented the Brahminical view. When performing action A, the result must be A, without change, increase, or decrease. regardless of changes in human psychology and emotions. This deterministic view led to structures like, the noble must remain noble, the humble must remain humble, or a king's son will become a king. The Buddha clearly saw that this deterministic view created the caste-based society of ancient India. The caste system of ancient India was sophisticatedly explained under the perspective of labor division. They believed each person was born into a particular occupation. These occupations together formed the operational structure. Each person played a role, a function. These roles and functions supported and complemented each other. There could be no situation where one person managed all scenarios. Thus, when born as a manual laborer, one continues in that role. Those with political talents, educational skills, or spiritual seeds continue on their path and ideals. There could be no change from one role to another. Each person maintains their role and position. Initially, this doctrine was seen as a truth. Each person is born with different personalities and capabilities. Education can partly change these, but complete change is difficult due to the long-standing determinism imposed on Indian minds. This imposition was elevated to a truth, and they accepted it without question. The Buddha's view, consciousness arises from conditions. Without environmental factors, this consciousness cannot manifest. He provided the metaphor of a flame named based on its fuel source. Fire from wood is called wood fire. Fire from straw is called straw fire. Fire from cow dung in Indian tradition is called cow dung fire. Fire from lightning is called lightning fire, and so on. Depending on the fuel, they have different names, but all indicate one thing. The nature of consciousness constantly changes like the nature of fire. There can be no transfer from the form of straw fire to the ashes formed by the burning straw. If it were fixed, this fire would never extinguish and the straw would never be consumed. The Buddha emphasized, if human consciousness were fixed in the process of birth and death, people would not age, die, or fall from kingship to commoners or prisoners. These all indicate the changing conditions. The Buddha explained that human consciousness similarly changes. When the eye contacts colors, shapes, sizes, or forms, the sense organ responsible for perception is called eye consciousness, i.e. the perception of the eye. Similarly, ear consciousness arises from sound. Other senses and their objects have equivalent values. Thus, humans have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness, and so on. Imagine a house with 5 windows and 1 main door. At night, lighting a candle or torch would instantly illuminate the exterior through the main door and the 5 windows. People might say, this is the light from the main door, the left window, the right window, the inner door, the outer window, and so forth. This is not wrong, but essentially there is only one candle or torch inside. In other words, the Buddha used this metaphor to demonstrate, when we speak of eye consciousness, it does not mean it has an independent consciousness separate from ear consciousness. Similarly, with body consciousness, mind consciousness, etc., there is only one overall consciousness with different functions related to the senses that humans and animals possess. Each animal has varying sensory sensitivities. Humans can develop sensory perception through eyes and ears, then use these senses in educational processes related to labor, communication, experience, and the continuation of skill seeds. Meanwhile, although animals may have superior sensory perceptions, they cannot create educational processes like humans. There are still limitations, whether it is the sensory perception of humans or animals. All share a single stream of consciousness manifested through the 6 sensory organs. Additionally, there are 2 more types of consciousness, the one that clings and leads to suffering, called manas consciousness, and the storehouse of all seeds accumulated over many lifetimes called alaya consciousness, or the storehouse of consciousness. This storehouse contains all the seeds of actions and attitudes humans experience over many lifetimes. It is a non-physical repository, a continuous stream of mind, present with humans and beings through the process of birth and death. The view of a long-lasting presence from one life to another differs between Brahmanism and Buddhism. The Buddha asserted that human consciousness depends on conditions. In contrast, Brahmanism maintains that it is fixed and immutable, unchangeable by human fate. Each sense organ has a distinct perception function. These functions support happiness, but also create trouble when the value of happiness exceeds its inherent demand. Consciousness is not an eternal reality, but a flow. The Mahayana tradition likens it to a waterfall, appearing as a plane or mass from afar but composed of countless atoms and molecules of H2O up close. Similarly, human physical structure and cognition are composite formations of many different conditions and factors. When senses malfunction like blindness, myopia, or hyperopia, the eye's perception diminishes. Other senses like hearing, smell, taste, touch, and mental state are similarly affected. Good senses lead to good perception. Perception quality also depends on surrounding conditions like light, distance, the inherent luminescence of objects, etc., establishing varied perceptions. One cannot say there is an unchanging perception when light conditions change. The same object, like a yellow flower, appears less vibrant under neon light but shines vividly under incandescent light. In total darkness, the yellow exists but cannot create the perception of yellow. No one can see it. Thus, perception inherently changes depending on light conditions, angles, viewpoints, sense quality, health, etc. Understanding perception as a flow allows people to believe that life can be renewed. Renewal occurs in two directions, negative and positive. Positive perceptions lead to positive outcomes, and negative perceptions lead to negative outcomes. Therefore, one should not rely on past achievements. To ensure a good future, constant effort is needed in the present. Moral and cognitive decline can occur, and human talents can fade. Vietnam has a saying, "Old age depletes talent." As one ages, adaptability to the environment and new inventions slows. Old knowledge becomes a clinging block, making it difficult to accept new, differing traditions. They become outdated, losing the ability to embrace better, higher values. The Buddha's analysis of the process from ordinary perception to enlightened life is a flow dependent entirely on mental perception. By stating the nature of perception and consciousness as non-fixed, the Buddha aimed to transform ordinary human perception into the enlightened wisdom of saints. This is the essence of his teachings. He did not create ordinary philosophical doctrines for commentary, evaluation, comparison, and debate. His doctrine dismantles all human attachments. It may be viewed as a philosophical tradition, but its essence is transformative philosophy. From this perspective, one can remain calm amid others' labels, judgments, and misrepresentations. People can have various ways to perceive, but the essence of the perceived remains one. Perception and the content of the perceived can differ entirely. Therefore, do not be afraid of being mislabeled or misrepresented. There's no need to justify unless there are conditions and requests for clarification. The accuracy of the explanation depends on the listener. Matter in mind, the Buddha asked Bhikkhu Sati and the attendees, "Can you see the objects happening right before your eyes? For instance, an animal walking, standing, lying, or sitting?" Everyone replied yes. The Buddha further affirmed, living beings, including humans, sustain their lives based on conditions, particularly food. Without food, human life can only extend for a few years or months at most. The formation of human life relies on food. There are two types of life: physical life and mental life. Similarly, there are two types of food: physical food and mental food. Physical life. This relates to the body's structure, which is made up of four elements: solids, liquids, air, and energy, known as the four great elements: earth, water, wind, fire. Physical life and its longevity depend on food, meals, drinks, and other nutrients related to this food. Meanwhile, mental life, which is equally important, is often neglected. Mental life. This includes emotions, cognition, conceptualization, spirituality, ethics, ideas, arts, etc. Its food consists of things related to the mind. Mental and physical life intertwine like a light bulb and electricity. Separating electricity from the light bulb leaves the electricity present, but its effect is minimal. If the switch or filament is broken, electricity still flows but no light emanates. Similarly, for the perception of electricity and light to be present, the physical body, like the light bulb, and its directly related factors must be in good condition. This understanding allows one to avoid extreme materialism or idealism. Both are extreme if seen as the sole origin of all phenomena. Believing that matter is the origin of all phenomena overly elevates the role of matter, leading to a lifestyle focused on enjoyment, viewing material wealth, money, and career as everything. However, happiness's essence lies in the stream of emotions. Matter is merely a condition, a means. Conversely, believing that mind is everything falls into the opposite extreme. Buddhist philosophy does not endorse idealism as some might claim. The Buddha taught dependent origination, focusing on conditions, mutual interdependence without an initial cause, whether mind or matter. Viewing things as either idealism or materialism is a misconception, separating phenomena from their interactions. The Buddha said, "When ordinary perception recognizes the process of conditions, one can live comfortably." The Buddha mentioned, wisdom begins with transforming a doubtful mind. Doubt creates fear, leading to unnecessary security measures, restrictions, regulations, and ways to protect life. This can result in opposition, exclusion, and conflicts. All of these stem from psychological doubt about oneself, others, religion, philosophy, and the nature of life. Doubt is a psychological force that binds, akin to tying a person up and throwing them into a river, telling them to swim to shore. How can one move forward? Therefore, doubt immobilizes people, trapping them in the conservative cycle of a particular viewpoint. Those filled with doubt struggle to practice, and the suffering they experience gets nurtured and protected, making happiness seem far away. Doubt's offspring is hesitation, leading to indecisiveness in any viewpoint. This standing still causes people to miss opportunities to encounter better things. Once doubt is transformed, wisdom starts to sprout and grow. A person with clear perception has firm faith in their happiness, without longing for what they do not have. If one longs with a doubtful attitude, the potential and conditions sufficient for happiness might be overlooked, thinking happiness lies somewhere else, in a new job, or relying on others. This causes them to abandon their strengths and chase after weaknesses, a significant mistake stemming from doubt. One must affirm what they have and utilize those to benefit themselves. Post-1975, many Vietnamese boat people sought a promised land. Arriving in new countries, they had no choices and had to build a career from scratch with all their positive efforts. Eventually, after 10 or 20 years, they established prosperous lives, some even more successful than locals. This is commendable because they had only one path forward, even if it was a towering mountain. Retreating would mean falling into an abyss. Climbing may risk falls, but with skill and method, they could reach the peak. Guided by the light of Buddhism, many Buddhists succeeded despite past pains and the haunting memories imposed by political and social conditions. Subsequently, many Vietnamese also sought similar happiness. They emigrated through marriage, labor cooperation, or other means. Some succeeded, but many failed. Some had wealth and jobs in Vietnam but left everything, thinking countries like the USA, France, Canada, Australia were paradises. Upon arrival, they adapted slowly, being affluent people used to comfort. Ultimately, suffering overwhelmed them whenever they recalled what they had. Returning to Vietnam would be shameful. Because of pride, they buried their lives. Here it is emphasized, resoluteness without wavering, avoiding the grass is greener on the other side mindset, helps people become clear-minded, unaffected by external influences, to move forward effectively. The Buddha reminded, to avoid clinging to truths, recall the parable of the raft taught in the 22nd Sutta, the snake catcher. The essence of the Dharma is to overcome suffering, not to be worshipped and held onto. Similarly, the image of the raft helps cross the river. If after crossing, one does not step ashore but continues drifting with the raft, happiness cannot be guaranteed. Worshipping the raft by carrying it on one's shoulders or head is meaningless and negatively impacts those needing the raft to cross. In other words, do not worship scriptures on the altar. Practice their values in life. The beginning of wisdom comes from affirming the mind on the foundation of cause and effect, perception, understanding, and experience. The Buddha emphasized, the nature of wisdom is to create purity, joy, and happiness. It is a mistake to desire ownership of spiritual values achieved. Spiritual essence is communal. The path to liberation and joy is communal. Never possess it for a sect, temple, family, or oneself. Those who wish to own the truth will suffer. Pride and arrogance arise from such possession. The nature of Buddhist practice is to transform the corners and thorns of the ego, including pride, shame, inferiority complex, hesitation, suspicion, fear, dogmatism, and authoritarianism. Believing oneself to be the pinnacle of truth, with everything and everyone else subordinate, creates egoistic thorns. Clinging to and boasting about truth leads to similar pride. My practice is correct, others are wrong. My path is the best, others are flawed. This alienates fellow practitioners who share the same spiritual teacher, the Buddha. Fortunately, in Buddhist tradition, though there are many schools and practices, practitioners have never seen each other as enemies, nor claim to be the sole truth. Food for samsara. The Buddhist teachings describe how to stop providing sustenance for the cycle of samsara in life. There are 4 types of nourishment considered essential for the sustenance of birth and death, the sustenance of suffering. They serve as the data foundation, helping beings grow when present. They are the necessary elements and conditions to help beings come into existence after passing away in a certain realm or form of life. 1. Physical food, kabalinkaro aharo. This is food ingested through the mouth and the physical body in general. For instance, eating, intravenous fluids, injecting nutrients into the body, etc., are all considered physical food. The concept of physical food originates from Indian culture, where people traditionally eat with their hands, not using chopsticks or spoons. To make food easier to consume without mess, they often mix the food and then use their hands to form it into balls before eating. The essence of physical food helps people grow and develop. Where food is scarce, malnutrition, reduced life expectancy, and increased disease are prevalent. Thus, taking care of human longevity starts with caring for their food intake. Knowing how to use the necessary food for life helps reduce consumerism that affects physical, intellectual, and mental health. The Buddha said, "Simply by regulating one's eating habits, people can reduce many illnesses significantly." Anyone who has been ill can relate to this. Doctors and pharmacists often prescribe dietary regimes according to the patient's condition to reduce, control, and confine the illness. The nature of physical food is to create health, extending lifespan. 2. Contact food, fasaharo. Contact food is nourishment obtained through the senses' interaction with their objects. Although it doesn't prolong life like physical food, it enhances life's values, adding enjoyment, such as the need for entertainment. Watching movies is contact food for the eyes. Traveling and sightseeing also fall under contact food. Contact food can be likened to spices and seasonings. The most important and hazardous to the process of birth and death is the conjugal life, where contact food serves as nourishment. Without this type of food, marital happiness may collapse because its nature creates habits and addictions. Those who invest in or depend too much on the contact food related to senses and their objects become slaves to habits, constraints, and entanglements they cannot break free from. Number 3. Volitional food, menosanstanaharo. Volitional food relates to willpower, intention, and thoughts of a person, acting as nourishment that prolongs human life and longevity. Willpower can extend life. For example, a bedridden patient may live longer if there is an unfinished event or task they long to complete. Similarly, the love and concern for a young child can help a patient extend their life for several months. When the intrinsic value of life ends, the nature of clinging to willpower and desires can prolong life for a short while. Understanding this psychological principle, to depart peacefully, practitioners and those controlled by illness should let go of it artfully and without regret.